I shall speak for a moment about the Buddha. He was to countless millions of people, and is, the ideal. His ideal was a far more non-religious philosophy and view. We would say religion than was extant in India at the time. It may, in the eyes, and is, for many of his followers, especially his priesthood, the monks and so on, secular in the sense of not envisaging God. And whether the Buddha did or didn't, it made very little difference. For in the eyes of vast numbers of the followers, he became the one that was worshipped, and is. He's the person they go to in their heart, in their mind, when they are troubled, the one they look up to, the one they see as content, full of bliss, whether he was or not, the one they see as all wise and all enlightened, the one they turn to when they're in despair for guidance, for consolation. Do you see, regardless of the theology, mankind knows what he needs, and he sees his God as such. As a tremendous need for God. The Buddha is whom they worship, in the sense that the Buddha is the ideal. He is endowed in their understanding, you could say imagination, but their view, with every blessing, full enlightenment, full peace, all knowing, all bliss. He's always there to turn to. He has complete consciousness of all things. These qualities are ascribed to him, even by the clergy. He has, in their view, oneness with all. It is a state that they too can attain to, ultimately. Perhaps over millions of incarnations, but in the case of, for instance, Zen Buddhism, no, it can happen in your lifetime. You can suddenly break through into that understanding of true reality, as opposed to what we are delusioned by here. The delusion of which causes great suffering and sorrow. The lot of all men. A discontent that, at least at times, is tragic. Quite simply, we would say from the outside, man has made again God in his own image, an ideal person, something to be looked to, full of compassion, a bodhisattva, in fact. Someone who suspends ultimate bliss until all other life goes through first to such enlightenment. You see, man has yet again worshipped the incarnation of his understood values, which spring from the needs that he experiences in living. And whether the Buddha, if he even lived, and I suspect he's mythical, it's a story. It's an invaluable story. It enshrines the values of vast culture. And vast culture is pretty similar in a sense. Wherever you look in history and of the world. Because it springs from the needs of life amidst uncertainty, time, space, matter, scarcity, change. Do you see? What did Islam need and find among a people who, like the Hebrew understanding, needed a political solution to chaos? They envisage God able to put such right and meet all the other needs that the individual, mankind, meets in their life. They need the best way of handling and answering and understanding their predicament in life. And they find what we call, I'm not sure if we actually say it quite the way that they say it, but Allah, God. God is merciful and kind. Allah the merciful, as I understand it. I don't understand much of Islam, you understand. But I know it's bedrock, it's truth. It is that God is kind, wonderful, a mighty warrior for his people that will bring them through, both nationally in a sense as a culture, internationally in that sense, and as individuals to what, I would call heaven. Full of truth. The simply wonderful ideal in a certain culture's eyes. In Hinduism, the guru, and in Buddhism, the teacher is seen as the ideal, the perfect one. Even though he's not, it's your duty to see him as such and obey him. To treat him in a sense as the incarnation of God. It's understood that this is the best way, that otherwise you won't learn effectively, and you don't come through anything like as fast. It's going to take an awful lot of incarnations to get there. In science, what we call secular science, we respect the great names. They are in our mind a living example of how to reason and overcome. They are noble in that what they've achieved is a tremendous benefit to mankind as we see it. The scientific method that they teach is both simple and what we would call rational. It is the way of reasoning. There is a tremendous underlying faith that background understanding of the cosmos, of the universe that we find out we're in, is fundamentally vital to the whole prosperity of mankind. Can't prove this is right. It's a belief. It's a belief that there's a rationality and a principle of causality that applies to everything. This has been sort of having a rough time with, it always has a rough time on the frontier because we see things that don't seem to be rationally consistent with our understanding. So in particle physics, we are playing with notions of the random, which is not unreasonable because we experience uncertainty. In most of what we do. We manage to live because we have enough of the predictable to sustain life in general, so far. When we don't, of course, we go under. Life is not sustained by definition. We have an ideal, a set of values in our mind in science as to what the ideal person is. It's extremely rational, incredibly patient in advancing his understanding, full of consciousness. He's incredibly aware. He studies something in minute detail to try and determine, in some sense, its fundamental inclination. which will contribute to our predictability of it in different circumstances. And from such springs incredible power. An omniscience over a natural world that could easily destroy us in different circumstances to what we need for survival. You might think there's a hope here against all reason, that everything is ultimately understandable and that uncertainty will be pushed, if not completely out of existence, at least to the boundary where it matters less and less to our prosperity and welfare as life. The scientist values life and health, same as everyone else. And he envisages what's necessary to achieve such. There are great, outstanding scientists in his mind, in his view, people he looks up to. He has a clergy of professors who profess what has been come to be understood, how to understand it, and how to increase the understanding further. That mankind prosper, have the fullness of life that perhaps is possible. Do you see every man suffers the variety of living as the years go by, has similar need from their own perspective and view, but similar need, causing their own perspective and view. And they've come up with similar solution. They envisage, they imagine, from their experience, what would be best, and value the values that might determine such. And they're not so different, in fact, to each other in the conclusions they come to. They turn to such teaching, to such understanding, most earnestly when they're in great need. Because this is the hope they have. Now, all these belief systems, in a rough and ready way, provide some solution for the common man. For its greats, in each case, it seems to provide a wonderful solution, almost a perfect way, perhaps even understood to be perfect. The way, the best way, compared to all others. And the one you choose, the one you find you are in and put first, is your way. What you truly value. That may ostensibly be presented as much the same as others in your culture. And most cultures are a bit sort of monolithic in that sense, that they have a common thread of understanding of their God. The personification of values that are held in common in large measure. But each person is an individual and has their view of such. What God, what they value, is to them. We will always see some path as better than others, even if that path be one that embraces all in some equality of appreciation from our point of view. But we see with our eyes, and our eyes see according to the individuality of who we are, how we have lived, what's happened to us, our experience to date. And this does change a little. For some people it changes startlingly in their life. And each society has a certain view of what's acceptable in values in its society. And that in itself has strong influence in relationship to what is held as God for each individual. It's popularly understood that many people in the world have no God. Well, maybe what you see as an impoverished view of what is necessary to make up God, but it's certainly what is valued, and it may therefore, in particular, not have been personified in the mind. It may still be at the level of a cluster of values, both interrelated and not necessarily perfectly consistent with one another, of course, that make up a matrix of what they value and who they are. In that sense, because it seems to be what's determining how they live, how they cope with the problem of living as they understand it. Reality of living is what makes living as tolerable as possible, as fulfilling and happy as possible. What seems to minimize suffering and unhappiness, and what we understand to be mistakes of living. Well, a major part of this scenario is the character and nature of the culture and society that we live in. For without society, our welfare is at a desperately low ebb, and life itself unbelievably precarious. So our view, our values, much include what we see as of value to society, and what constitutes a good society to live in from our perspective. seeking joy and happiness and life amid the dangers and needs and uncertainties and shortages that we may be finding ourselves in. Part of the Buddhist teaching is quite clear. Take the teaching, see if it works. Do you find this to be true? Not take the teaching and prove it to be right. You could be there forever. Life is short. Practice this and see if it works. In some good faith you receive that of a kind heart this has been offered. It's there, for free. Take, eat. It's given in faith that you will find it to be true, you see. And in a sense we could say all spiritual teaching is like this. Do you find it to be a blessing? Little girl I met the other day, handicapped little girl. And I said in a previous recording quite recently, didn't I? And she found I'm my only child. She said, "Is it lonely, Marshall?" "Yes, love, it is." And her compassion was lovely. She finds it lonely too, and it gets worse with age, she says to me. So she's only something like 11. You see, she's compassionate already. She knows your predicament. She sees it, she visualized it. She assumes it's the same as hers, of course. And of course you don't feel alone with such a person. She physically reached across and took my hand, but I'm not sure as I didn't do the same thing at the same time. You see, there's a meeting of compassion and understanding. I don't mean I'm plagued by loneliness at the minute. But asked by an innocent soul, do you find it lonely? Yes, it's something that is lonely, of course. Yes, love. And I knew at that instant loneliness meant something to her, as it has meant to me. And we are one. As a moment in time that perhaps lasts all time, we are one. Both full of compassion for the other. Both for a moment extended their view of self to include the soul whose hands we are now holding in earnest understanding and compassion. What a sweetheart, what an angel. Now I'm probably ascribing far too much to her as a consequence of this moment in time. But do you see, it's like a window into how we should all be, filled with compassion and understanding. And what do you call it when you see it for a moment from their point of view, with their eyes, and you know their situation. And you may say it's purely imaginative, but everything is in the mind. If it's not in the mind, well, it doesn't exist from our point of view. It just does not exist until it's in the mind, or the consequences of such hit us in the mind. Whatever's happening to the body, until it's registered in the mind and you're conscious of it, it's of no account. What is eternal life? what is the fullness of life? What is life itself? Some religions, especially Indian religions or Eastern, have seen it as a diminution, I think is the word I'm looking for, of ego, of self, to be lost in a oneness with the whole. Judaic ideal is understood to be an individuality that's harmonized, well, simplistically in the state of Israel, the Hebrew ideal state, so to speak, but more expansively in a oneness of paradise, heaven, of harmony of the individuals. Not that you lose the ego identity, but that it's honed, fashioned, harmonized into a wonderful whole. The awesomeness of God, the ideal personification of your ideal values, as you hope it, understand it to be. Whichever view is valid, the outcome is an astonishing peace, joy, meeting of mind. Of completeness and attainment, oneness. Something akin to what you taste when you fall in love. And this person is part of the self now that you treasure and value. They know it, you know it. Ideally. Not much good if you know it and they don't, of course. You're not getting anywhere till they both feel the same thing. For two people to come together, they need to both love each other, don't they? So loving kindness becomes a very fundamental element in this understanding of the ideal. It's compassion and understanding, joy. It may, at one extreme, at the scientific level, be understood to rest upon a common understanding of the reality we find ourselves in. And if we all have this, then we start to be in harmony because we know we're in the same world. We're seeing the world from the same perspective. We start to get an identity with each other, common identity that is a harmony. We both understand reality, and therefore we both understand we must do the following, and off we charge and do it, until we find, problems here, and you might then think this is the solution, and I might think that's the solution, and we need to apply our faith and teaching of science, understanding and observance of the real world to come to a shared understanding, joint understanding, and get the harmony back and the power back. At the other extreme, it's an understanding, again, of a different sort in our mind, of the other person's view, an appreciation somehow that you would be the same way in their situation. You have compassion. You know how they would feel and are feeling to some extent. You've experienced something of it yourself, and you reach out to each other in unity of purpose to long to put such right if we can. We have a common problem. Well, life has a common problem in living, in sustaining life, and what it does about death, illness, pain, sorrow, suffering. Well, to some extent, all views are experienced. And our God tends to incorporate the values appropriate to the similar problems that man suffers in living. He needs at one end power, control over the things that would harm him and things that could bring prosperity and happiness. And he needs joy and oneness, fellowship, pleasure, life, freedom, expression, the complexity of relating with others, both for his physical maintenance, which is much of what society tries to protect for him, and even supply, and for his personal happiness, joy of relationships that are beneficial, happy, a blessing, full of loving kindness and cooperation. That both sides bring prosperity. He wants love and power. He wants an all-powerful God who is all-loving too, as he understands such to be needed from the experience he's had. We're all needing God as we see it. As a consequence of this. So, and of course this very view as expressed here of what God and religions are and why, and the problem of man, as expressed here in this tiny recording of some just short of 40 minutes now, is itself a statement of reality that could be validly true, the case, the best view as I see it, to rescue man from his difficulties caused by what we might then call wrong view, not realizing this truth. And by truth we now mean the best understanding from the point of view of what is understood to be our well-being. And that view, of course, is modified by our experience in striving towards what such values imply in terms of action and solution in our experience of continual living. we are then ever seeking a theology and understanding of philosophy, a view that seems to result in a fullness of life that is most attainable. It will be dependent upon our hopes, and our hopes in turn will be dependent upon what we have seen and how we have seen our predicament in the life situation. That is to say, our understanding, the way we think. And we wrestle with this and we say, well, what way of thinking is going to be preferred best? And it's been found in the wisdom of the ages that it's best to envisage the existence of the possible existence of a super being that is creator of all, and in the Christian view, father of all, the creator. In almost every religion's view, one that is motivated by compassion, especially to man, but possibly to all life, and the environment that is necessary as we see it for man, namely the planet and the universe, the stars of heaven and the sun and whatnot, okay? That it's best to have this as a view in your mind. It's been found that this is the way to go, and that if you don't go this way, all sorts of horrible things tend to happen in your society and in your own life. You're told in your society that this view is true. This is the best thing to think. And basically, I mean, your experience is that your society has provided the life that you have. And that, in some sense, wrong view results in the life that you have and your society not being as good as it could be. So you're anxious to find out what's best in this view. What is the best view of your God? And that's where we are. In a sense, we're trying to find out what works. Does it work? When Marshall says to you, well, whatsoever is good and lovely, think on these things and thank God for it. And this will increase your hope and your trust in the provision of God, your hope, and your joy, your happiness. It'll give you a prosperity, a loving kindness, an attitude towards others. And this will, of course, bring great good response in general, brings response of kindness coming back because people find you're a blessing to them. You know, if one wants to think of the mechanics of what's going on, it's something like that. So, you know, Marshall was saying, well, thankfulness is the path to all the spiritual things that you need, namely all the strengthening of all the values and inclinations that bring about a prosperity of life, the epitome of which is life eternal. So this is life eternal, to know God. The only true God, the one that really does bring the fullness of life, and the way to such. as epitomized perhaps by Jesus, or your view of Jesus. It doesn't matter whether he existed as a person or not. He lays out, describes, examples the view that might be best to take. Is it? Try. Don't try and prove it's right or the best, other than by doing it. Because if it does work, whether you can prove it or not, that's what you're going to do, because that's what you value. And if it doesn't work, no matter how much it's proved, philosophically and logically, well, still not working. Okay? So, to know God, in that sense, is to have found that God is, to have experienced God in your life, to find that it works, that this view of God is valid. And to find that way, well, we envisage there's some sort of noble option, that the way is there to be read or understood or heard, listened to, the teaching, and see if it works. If there's a variety of things out there you could be doing, alternatives, well, you're going to be drawn to the one that you're drawn to, and that will depend on your experience of life. So some people follow some teachers and some follow others. Some follow one view of God and some another. You might be very legalistic, you might be very liberal, you might be very fundamentalist, you might be much more embracing, you might be what's termed to be quite secular, but you will follow such and find out. And your experience from such will no doubt modify your view, and you'll start to shift to seeking something that seems to be more promising. And we trust that in this way you'll come towards the best. Thank you, Heavenly Father. So, all I'm saying in this series of recordings is that the Jesus view seems to be very much that you understand God as a benevolent, wonderful, and powerful Heavenly Father. And depending on your experience of what fatherhood means, this will be the best direction to be based on, to have as your foundation. And the Hebrew principle in general was that God is praise. You can't have a relationship with God without valuing what you understand him to be. In other words, you should worship, love your God, value your God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. So his name in Hebrew gives you some indication of how to find him. It's through praise. You don't have a relationship with this God, except you can praise and worship him. And the Christian understanding is that this God is, in some sense, your Father. You are one with, you are born of, you are consistent fundamentally with, and should come to that view that you are of the same spiritual genetic makeup. And of course, our experience in living is ideally that parents love their children, and so you will have an assurance that since you are born of him, he loves and cares for you. And you'll have an assurance that he is of what you value at heart too, because you are of the same material, you are of him, and will grow into some being that's in some sense an adult with him. Wonderful thing, you see. Thank you. Heavenly Father.